Welcome back, everyone. We just had a short reboot here. And again, we're here with Heidi and Tom. And Tom, for those who don't know you, where do you work and what do you do?
Good morning, Heidi and Martin. I work in San Juan Capistrano, California, just north of San Diego County. And for those that don't know me, that I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in couples. And approximately 12 or 13 years ago, I got introduced to Integral. And like many people have the same story, it really changed. It created a lattice upon which I could reconceptualize what I was doing for years. And ever since then, I've been off and running, filling in different gaps on the Integral map for how it pertains to couples, much like you do, Martin.
Great. So we're talking about the highest stages, and we just left off explaining a little bit what states are and what stages are. And you offered us a quick overview of your stages model. So why don't we continue here?
Yes, I wanted to show the overview of the stages model. And it starts with the concept of pixie dusting couples. And I'm finding that when you expose couples to the highest states, that it acts like an accelerant in their development as both individually and as a couple, because it shows them the enchantment that lies ahead. And even though they can't hold that stage or that state necessarily, it does seem to really help. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At the end, I'm going to want to compare the first love stage, which is stage 4, with stage 5, which is the spiritual stage, the highest stage that I can conceptualize. But I wanted to show the couples line real quick to get people a feel for what we're talking about. So just to set it within an integral framework, I love to do these marital vows. When you marry somebody, you're marrying every part of their developmental history, every part of their background. So this is the vows I would write. Will you take the temper tantrums, the upper right, the sensitivity, the overreactions, the insecurities, the character defects, the control issues, the upper left issues, the unrealistic expectation, all the cultural stuff in the lower left, the unresolved family issues, and the uncontrolled regressions, for better or for worse. I always like saying, at least they got that part right, for better or for worse. Because what I mean by the uncontrolled regressions is one of the most dangerous things police officers walk into, I believe you know, is, do you have it offhand?
Pardon?
One of the most dangerous things police officers walk into is
it's family, yeah.
Right, family turmoil. Because in essence, you can have somebody, because they're regressed in that moment, functioning at the age of 2 or 3, but they weigh 220 pounds and they can't be told to go to their room. They got to be maced and handcuffed, and somebody can be hurt at doing that. So to move on just a little bit on this, in the quadrants, we can see, if I was to say the quality of intimacy is dependent upon each person's developmental history, their individual physiological response, both to intimacy, joyful intimacy, do they look away? Do they become flooded? Or during conflict, can they no longer think? Gottman had said that when a couple's in conflict, they can't even breathe. Their heart rate is accelerated. Their breathing is shallow. It looks like the same response as if they're in a war zone. So this intimacy is also dependent upon the cultural expectations, what they have absorbed and what they expected versus the reality of what's possible. And then the all-important strength of the couple patterns. Do they know how to problem solve? Do they know how to give and take? Do they know how to take turns? Is there reciprocity in the relationship? That lower right in much of integral theory is under articulated, because these are the injunctions of how we actually arrive at a place. It's not enough just to imagine it. We have to understand the pathway of how we get there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
At least the people who understand the quadrants, these kind of differentiations. So.
Right. So to move on a little bit, to get to the line fairly quickly, here is the couples line.
On the,
you can see
on the right side. Okay,
say it again,
stages. On the right side are the stages. I just try to understand the. Okay.
Right. On the right side, going up on the vertical, are the stages.
Yes.
And it sits all upon the quadrants, which obviously are, have an effect upon the stage where you are at any moment. We use an integral. It's all tetra-arising at once. And that's what makes couples so difficult to work with, is because everything's surfacing at once. But the relationship starts, as you can see, as safety and attraction. And this is a wonderful stage. This is a stage that you hope never ends. And, the projective identification of the ideal is going on. We find out at this stage, our ability to imagine love far exceeds our ability to realize it. And you can feel the lower left cultural messages playing with the stage. Romantic movies often end at this stage, I like to tell people. And at the heart of this stage is a lot of chemistry and absorption, rather than what happens in later stages, where it's based on empathy and understanding. And you can also see the pre-trans fallacy. A pre-trans fallacy is a mistaken interpretation that a stage arises from a higher level, a state arises from a higher level than it actually is. And there's one at the core of this safety and attraction stage. And it feeds, if I can switch to the next slide, it feeds through fallacies, to persistent fantasies you can see in the orange box. And that first fantasy is when you're getting thrown out of the stage into the role stage, and you feel a decrease of the magic and the feeling you had initially. The persistent fantasy is, I got involved with the wrong partner. And number two is, other people get to live at this stage. And those fantasies stay with us through up until the relational stage. They keep persistent because the lower left is playing with those cultural messages. The romantic movies show that safety and attraction is attainable. And all you have to do is buy this ring, create this romantic involvement, and it'll persist. And reality is what throws us into stage two, because he's irritable, she's non-communicative, he withdraws during conflict, she gets overly excited perhaps. I mean, all those nuts and bolts of how do you negotiate this emotional terrain and come out of the other end of it and be able to resume the enchantment and the love on and have a transition so that you can get there. Does that make sense?
So far, so good.
So moving along to just introduce the stages is, so reality throws us into stage two, the role stage, where we have to lay down those patterns of how to function together as if you're married, husband and wife, father and mother if you have children, dealing with friendships, how do you one person lead, the other person supports, all those important things get laid down. When you get really good at them, you're at the relational stage. And this stage didn't even come on till the mid-60s. And you notice it correlates with the green level of development, postmodernism. For some people understand what it is. And the flexibility of roles begin to work. Communication begin to work. This is a pretty high level of development. Most couples come in and see me at the role stage and they're in conflict. They can't get the patterns down.
Mhm.
And if I can get them to the relational stage where it's working, they give and take in, there's flexible roles, they can handle the regression that I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
then we're doing real well. Most people, even in the integral community, they're at the relational stage and they're hoping to get into first love. Because what we learn in the integral community, it's a lot easier to get to second tier state experiences with someone we're not in love with. Do you have a sense why that would be easier?
Yeah, because there is not the ballast, how do you say, or the weight which you are carrying with you, or the conflicts and whatever. But it's a sort of a new person, and you can be open and trustful and everything. And there is no, hidden resentment or something like that.
Right.
Keep the sex out of it. It's much easier.
Yeah, that's true.
That's funny. Christine said to me about that, in order to get first stage, she says, I had to compartmentalize when the parts of you that are less than perfect.
Mm.
And I love that insight because it is an intent that I'm going to put aside. I'm going to accept the less perfections. And a lot of this mirrors what we do in our own individual development. It's a choice on what we focus upon. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit of how you actually get into first love. Mm-hmm. So to continue this, so relational stage is wonderful. And getting into first love, we have done injunctions of how to do that previously. You can see it on the Wisdom Factory. It's the Heidi broken into part 1 through 4 and put in a lot of nice graphics and everything else so that we understand, how to get there. So, but part of it is how we do that, which we're not going to do today. I have some pretty clear techniques of how we do that, but I would invite people to go back and watch those videos because it is a practice that you can do with somebody to actually open up that space. So to introduce this stage, I'm always amazed at how a couple can do 85% of their relationship well, and it's the 15% wrong that become 80% of their state experience.
Mm-hmm. We're talking about first love now?
Yeah, I'm kind of introducing first love with this reality.
So
we're still looking at the green screen. So
yeah, but what you are saying, I think, is that the negative experiences we have, we make them count much more than the positive experiences. And especially in our relationship, we expect that everything is perfect. And when something doesn't work, then it's sort of annihilating the parts which already are working well, and it's overshadowing, and we think, oh no, this relationship doesn't work, only because you say 15% doesn't work, 85% works, but we sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's is it a normal characteristic for is it no first love? Not yet. It's raw stage, no?
It's still relational love.
Relational.
Mm-hmm. That's a very normal process. That's what I've seen doing couples therapy for 34 years, is why is that ratio so imbalanced? And part of it is, we're so vigilant about danger in our lives that even in our individual development, anxiety can become part of our cognitive process. I mean, it frequently is, because we're in this hyper-vigilant mode, as a Maslowian imperative, as you like to say, Martin, that it tends to privilege the survival functions above other things. And it's only with an intent to tap a higher part of ourselves that we get away from it. So see, it's just showing up in the couple level, what shows up in the individual level. And it mirrors the same thing. So I like the way you put that, Heidi, is privileging the negative over the positive.
Mm.
So, and I think what I'll do is I want to skip that part and go right here to get there. And let's make that bigger so people can see it. So in first love is an intent. And we're actually finally in love with our partner and not the projected ideal.
Mm.
Because what we're doing in first love is we're living in the abundance, much like we do in our individual practice. We're focusing upon the positive. And if you practice some of those techniques, those eye contact exercises that I detail in that part 1 through 4 in the Wisdom Factory, then it becomes a pathway that's much more readily accessible. And you're able to actually feel, the love at a much higher frequency. So in many ways, what happens here too is we drop those pre-trans fallacies. We no longer are drawn into those cultural messages because we don't believe them anymore. We don't believe it's that easy. States are given. The relational level is earned, much like any other line of development. Mm-hmm. And when you begin to access this, even if you just float up into it occasionally, I don't know why this is going on its own. It gets much easier to give up those pre-trans fallacies. So
can we talk about that? What that means?
Absolutely.
So, for instance, when you go into first love and you get angry about what your partner does, and then you sort of stop and say, "Is it really what he says making me angry?" Or is it maybe whatever, I'm in a bad mood, or he just triggered me and things like that. And then you can sort of control your response.
Your projection.
To your projection, yes. And you can avoid to break out into a fight, which he probably, or she, who it is, wouldn't even understand why you are so angry, because they haven't said anything really nasty or something. But so with other words, you take responsibility for your own feelings, and you can say, "Oh, what you have said makes me angry, but probably it's not because of what you said, but because I feel that there is something with me, and situations like this make me angry." Is this a practice which is leading to that stage?
Absolutely, Heidi. That's well said, because rather than it being subject, as Keegan likes to say, it's object. We begin to develop the witnessing state and go, "I've seen this pattern before." And we begin to go internal and look at, why does that go off so strong? So now we can calm down the upper right, the physiology, and I can stay present longer. In fact, when we compare stage 4 to 5, we're going to really see how that works. Rather than setting off an amygdala hijacking, it really becomes an avenue upon which more discovery can happen. So yeah, absolutely. All those skills have to develop for each person in order to actually achieve these, because it's two. And the person with the lower center of gravity is going to set the ceiling on the relationship.
Yeah, and this might be also a reason why to choose the right partner for the relationship, where then Martin comes into play with his single platform for
integral singles. Yeah,
integral singles. Yeah, who when you are feel that you are on the integral level, that you can find somebody who is more or less on your level, because we have said previously, Tom, that when there is too much difference in the developmental level of the individuals that it's really, really difficult to make a relationship work, isn't it?
Absolutely. Martin has said that many times. Do you want to say something here, Martin?
Well, I've said it many times.
You cannot say it often enough, because we still fall, normally people, at least when they're very young, not as old as we are, no? They fall in love because of sexual attraction, and then sexual attraction only makes you blind, and you don't really find out often who the other person is, and it takes some awareness to not get overwhelmed by this infatuation, but to make a sort of a test. Is the other person at the level I would like to have a partner of? So that's really not so easy. And I think many people will deny that and will even be sort of angry, because they think love is something which comes and then you have to accept it, and don't try to figure out if, don't test the person. But I think we better do, because otherwise we pay with a lot. And I have paid several times.
Yeah.
I'm reading right now the book on Eros by, Mark Gaffney. And he's saying that Eros sets up the allurement. And I really like that, because I'm not sure how much opportunity we have to pick, because we're going to pick somebody developmentally that matches us, because it is evolution insisting upon you go through these lessons and stages. And the hope becomes you pick somebody that's willing to grow with you, and you can raise that center of gravity. I don't think you can leapfrog ahead. It's just like our individual development, that you're going to pick somebody that either complements or mirrors on a myriad of functions. All those connections are there. That is the evolutionary process. We're not individual entities as much as we feel that way at times. Do you agree with that, Martin?
Yeah, I think as long as we're in different gender roles, where one partner is mainly responsible for the public sphere and the other one for the domestic sphere, and there is very little co-creation, right? People at different, like my parents, they perfectly coexisted, my mother being on a mythic level and my father on a rational level. But she left everything outside the house to him, and he left everything inside the house to her. And they didn't really have to make any decisions together, and avoided conflict that way. But as soon as couples, want to co-create their relationship and in the public and in the domestic sphere, and they have to make decisions. That's why so often when couples go on vacation, where they then all of a sudden have to start to co-create in the same realm, the conflicts emerge. At home it works, and then as we so often say, when people then are at different levels of consciousness, their validity claim, the way how they justify their actions and argue for that they're right, is very different from what arguments their partner makes. Not only laterally different, but really, as you explained, comes from a different level of consciousness, and they just don't find even a common language. We see that in politics all the time, of course.
Right. I mean, it's amazing we're surviving, given the level of morass and confusion that goes on.
Yeah.
Even in our community, it's still hard to hold a center of gravity where you're not projecting and you have that clarity and you're at your higher self. So in intimacy, it gets much harder because of the constant threat and whatnot that's going on.
Yeah.
So,
and as Ken Wilber explains, right, in communities, in social holons with multiple members, it's very easy that you can leave the group if you no longer like the people, and new people enter. And so that creates a different level of complexity than if you're in a marriage with children and a shared home and things like that. There's much more pressure to work things out, right? So
exactly,
that makes integral communities often relatively unstable, because there are so many interests and so many different perspectives, even though they come from an integral level. That anyway, but we're going off. I want to stay with the couples, of course.
Yeah, but we love those gatherings. we can feel ourselves at the highest stage and the state experience and whatnot. So just to finish
so
your
first love, right?
Yeah. I wanted to show you this slide because do you remember the Wilbecolm lattice? What I'm realizing, this is somewhat preliminary, that a couple goes through a similar experience as seen in the Wilbecolm lattice, that on the left side are the stages, on the top is the state. So you can see on the bottom, the state experience of safety and attraction peaks, and the X's mean, depending upon each individual's level, this is what they could experience.
Yes.
And the red line is just the trend. So it peaks at safety and attraction. Reality hits, they're thrown out of that wonderful stage into the role stage. And if they're young, they're going to leave the relationship because they feel like the relationship isn't right. It's only with experience that you realize that you got to earn the stage. As they have success in building the interactional patterns and the give and take and being there for each other, the state begins to take off again. If they're fortunate enough to hit moments of first love, it becomes more and more of a state experience where it stretches beyond a collective eyes. Many of even in our interrural communities, we tend to be a collective eyes rather than we, because that's a much harder state to hold. And in first love, you may get there. You're much more authentic. There's much more essential selves holding up. But I'm not sure there's quite the we space or the unit of consciousness yet. But I'm very much playing with this at this point. I'm not even sure of the top state categories. And I didn't want to just use the regular state categories, on that other people use, because I wanted some sort of states that define the couple a little bit and whatnot. So without further ado, going a little bit further.
I was wondering about this stage. You say it's not yet a we space, but when I look back on my relationships, what I lived with Mark was the first we which I ever lived. Before it was a me and somebody else, and we are together and do something, but it was not. Yeah, we said we, but it was not a felt we, as it was more two single people who are nearby, but not. And this was for me the first moment where I really thought this is now something I'm an integral part of, and it's not me separate or he separate, So that would be first love, or what would that be?
It would be first love, because you're immersed in that stage. But you had asked originally, is separate eyes or we? And I do believe at times you would peek into the we's, but the question is whether you could sustain that state experience. And because, that's where it begins to fall off. You can't sustain the state experience on that. Now, I dare say you and Mark are way beyond the average campers. We're way beyond the average campers in doing this.
Yeah, it was different than what I saw before. There was a sort of a basis, an unseen but felt basis, which I never felt in relationships before.
And do you think that was more a result of your previous work that you had done, that you were ready to open that with someone else, or was it particularly emerging uniquely with Mark?
No, I think it was due to the previous work. And I actually, when I met Mark, I tested him, in the first 4 weeks where we were together. He came over from America, and I spoke up whenever there was something strange, and I tested him if he would go with me and accept that, or how would he react when I say, oh no, that's not okay, you know. And I realized that he was very friendly and sometimes also pissed off, I have to say. But we both had a possibility to say, okay, let's see what is there, you know. And he was able to learn certain things which I already had learned. I could pointed him out how he was trying to manipulate, for instance, and he wasn't aware of that. And I had learned it some years before, how much I was manipulating in you know, expectations and this. Oh, no, please do it's exaggerated, but something. If you would love me, then you would have done X, Y, Z. You know, that is the classical. And I realized that much before, and so I could go away from all that and see it much more clear. And I really liked the way he handled that. He was not angry. He was more astonished and said, "Oh, yeah, that I want to understand," and things like that. And at the same time, he was not just saying yeah to whatever I said. When he was seeing that it was not right for him, he could say that. And that was the most important thing for me, because I wouldn't have liked a person who is always, you know, sort of following me like a dog. And he definitely was not. And I tested that out in the first 4 months. He really let me go very far, let's say. He allowed me a lot and he supported me a lot. But when he thought that was not okay, he could say that. And that was the important thing. And if people think that this stage of love is only all the time like, ha, 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 it's not. It's really work. It's work. And we did the work. And every Valentine's Day, we renewed the commitment. And one part of the commitments was that everybody is doing the growth process for themselves, and that we would help each other to do that. And in moments of conflict, we would first go into ourselves and see what is our part in it, and then be open to talk about it. And that we did. And that was, so it was work. It was work, yeah. But it was perfect. It was really, it has created an intimacy. Yeah, sexual too, but it was not about sexual intimacy. It was an intimacy as a person between people, which I hadn't ever lived before, and amazing.
Yeah, I really love that, Heidi. You know, the agreement that you're going to take a moment and go into yourself in order to read the subtle feelings before you started communicating, problem solving. That's very nice.
Yeah, and also when we exploded, that can happen, no? Then say, oh, that was, for instance, Mark had an image. It was a dream. He said it was recurring in his early years, that there was an old man kicking with his feet against a gate, and the gate was alone in the middle of a field. And so when he was like in this mood, he said, oh, the old man is kicking, something like that, you know. So
he made an avatar to deal with that part of himself.
Yeah.
So Tom, can we come back to your image of the modified Wilbur-Combs lattice? I think I want to understand a little better, and maybe some of the listeners are also curious.
Okay, so let me get over there. Make that big. So we did this screen.
Yeah.
And
so,
I want to move ahead.
So the traditional Wilbur-Combs lattice on the left side has the spiral dynamic stages, let's call it that, or the levels of consciousness.
Yeah, on the left is, that would be on the Wilbur's comb, right?
Yeah, and then across horizontally at the top would be the levels of spiritual awareness or realization, from gross to subtle to causal to witness to non-dual. And so how does that relate to this lattice that you created?
Well, on this, all I'm saying is an intimate couple is going to go through these predictable patterns of changes in state as their stage evolves. And it you know, unlike Wilbecolm, where all different kind of states could be available for every stage,
Mhm.
I'm not quite sure it happens the same way.
Yeah.
And again, this is still evolving in my thoughts.
Yeah.
This isn't crystallized at all yet.
And so in your experience, does every couple, when they meet, start in the safety and security and then goes up on the left horizontal? Or can couples basically, like maybe Heidi and Mark, enter basically at the first love level?
No, they start as safety and attraction
Uh-huh.
because there has to be that basic chemistry.
Mhm.
And that has to be there. Otherwise, it's more like a brother and sister relationship.
But why would the other level be excluded, so to speak? Why can't both arise at the same time?
I think they get there
That you're physically attracted to someone and have the chemistry, and you already have the capacity for the first love qualities.
I think what happens, Martin, is the chemistry is so powerful up front,
Mhm.
and the fantasies go through the roof on each person.
Mhm.
You've written a lot about that. Is what the woman in terms of nesting and children and
Sure, the safety needs.
Yeah, their safety needs go through the
Mhm.
roof. Then we're feeling the sexuality. It's clouding everything that we're perceiving in that moment. It's not until it settles out. It's a very important stage. It's like it gets enchanted, and Eros is running wild and penetrating a lot of areas during that time. But reality is going to come back. We want to be able to drop into it, at times, but reality is going to come back.
So we're basically in an intoxicated state, right? Like a drug-induced state, and it overrides, it hijacks our prefrontal cortex, our rational brain, basically, and we're enjoying it, right? We're saying, "Yay!"
We're just absolutely enjoying it.
Just going along for the ride.
One of the ways I see it, Martin, is when somebody meets somebody new, I ask them, within the first month, tell me 3 things that are shortcomings in the person.
And they're
And
none.
they struggle to come up with it. Whereas 5 years from now, they could write 5 pages of shortcomings.
Okay.
So you can see how much their perception is really funneled into because of all the chemistry running. And that's just part of our evolutionary nature. We're going to have to deal with it. But as Gaffney likes to say, Eros is much more than sex. And that's what gets sublimated, to borrow from Freud's idea of how it ends up in an evolutionary way. So
it is important what Heidi and Mark, or Heidi did with Mark at the beginning, to step a little bit out of the chemistry and also verify at least the capacity to eventually get to this higher stage.
Yes, and I
So
dare
we're not
say,
getting stuck with a partner who cannot go up the left side of your lattice.
Yeah, and see if you want to go out on a limb with me on this one, Martin. I do think it's a little easier for a woman than a man in a heterosexual relationship to step outside the chemistry. Do you think that's true?
I've never been in a female body, so I can't really tell, but I had some women going pretty crazy on me and vice versa.
Yeah, why do you think that, Tom?
Yeah,
why do you think that?
I just don't think the libido runs as all-encompassing in a woman as it does a man.
I think the first infatuation, I don't think there is a big difference. Later, there is a difference, but at the beginning, I don't think so.
So it runs as strong. Yeah.
Some things in the old book, a man has a penis and a brain, but only enough blood to supply one at a time. Right?
That's funny.
It's good that you are men saying that.
I felt dizzy when I met my wife.
That's good.
That's a good one. Right. Can I move on?
Okay, yeah. I just explained to me that the horizontal line at the top. I have the left side now, and your way of thinking on your lattice.
Okay. So the horizontal line is the states.
Okay.
These are the states. But as I said, Martin, I'm trying to come up with states that are a little more apropos to couples rather than just borrow the ones for individuals. Because they don't seem to quite, capture what I want. So I'm playing with these state experiences that are a little more descriptive for couples. And again, I'm not wedded to these yet.
But you're loosely relating them to the gross, subtle, causal, and witness?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
Okay,
yeah,
got it now.
The witness, would be where the we space is.
Yes.
And that's where, I was having a hard time with that is, well, yeah, it does show up, but it doesn't really describe the totality of the experience. Whereas I thought we space did a little bit better job in doing that.
And then unitive consciousness obviously is the non-dual.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which makes
Thank
sense.
you. Yeah.
Okay. So getting up to the spiritual stage, the fifth stage, and what we're going to do here next is compare first love to spiritual, but just by way of an introduction, this is the fifth stage. There's the non-dual, as you said. I have never seen a couple capable of holding this space for any amount of time. Jeff Saltzman tells me him and Chuck can do it. At times they can float into here. I just haven't seen it. I'm speculating from other developmental lines what this would look like. And Heidi, some of the things you said about you and Mark, you're going to see in the next slide. They're right on. But that's why this is really rarefied ground, and it might even be third tier capabilities. I'm not sure if this is second tier or third tiered. But at this level, deficiencies are expected, they're explored, they're integrated, which how you and Mark use shadow, you can see as the beginning of that. Transparency doesn't result in overexposure. This couple is ripping and roaring because they have so much internal work done, they're ready to do this. So,
yeah. Well, you say because of our relationship with Mark, he was always saying when he was not afraid of telling me his dark sides or what was going on, not at all, and neither was I. So it was appreciated when we could share these things. Is it that what you mean?
Absolutely, that there's enough exploration of the internal that when our partner exposes something, we don't go into automatic physiological panic and defensiveness. Oftentimes when I'm working with couples, they get that exposure and they quickly go to, I don't do it all the time, you do it too. And you can feel them overwhelmed in the moment, even if the partner says it really well. But individually, there hasn't been enough internal exploration, so the familiarity is there and they don't overreact. But again, most people can't do that. They can't kind of drop into that third person perspective or the witness view and go, whoa, I didn't even see that. Tell me more, because the physiology kicks in and they're off and running in a defensive posture. So that's what we're going to do on the comparison of first love with spiritual love capabilities. So look, I'm down on to the, can you see me move my cursor around?
I cannot.
No, I can't either. No.
Okay. So I'm on the third one, tendency for exposure and shame. In first love, there's only a tendency for exposure and shame. They're still feeling it. Unlike at relational or lower stages, they can go into overexposure in a heartbeat, much of like what we were just talking about. In spiritual love, there's quick adjustments to exposure. They recognize the state that's emerging and the clarity that's emerging, and they can settle down right away. One of the imageries I like to use is when you think of those telescopes that look into space, the mirrors have these actuators underneath the dish that quickly adjust, the mirrors so that it can compensate for distortions in the atmosphere. And there's all these little actuators underneath it that adjust so that they can stay present and they can stay clear on the imagery that's emerging. But that's what happens when people have spiritual love capabilities. Even though that novelty, that a creative advancement, the novelty what's his face had said, they're not overreacting to it, whereas at first love, they're still reacting to it to some degree. Does that make sense?
To me, it does, yeah. I mean, there's enough presence there that basically, as you said earlier, the amygdala is not flooding your brain with past emotions, and you can no longer separate what is happening now and what is flooding in from the past, right? And even though you experience the flooding, you are aware of the flooding and
exactly
and can adjust, and otherwise people cannot make that distinction.
Right.
Yeah, you have to practice to distinguish that. It's not just comes from somewhere. You really have to practice.
Yeah.
Right. And Heidi, when you described your work with Mark and how you handled shadow, you could see that the two of you were laying down those patterns. They may not have been as quick as in spiritual love, because in spiritual love, they're really aware of what's going on. They're aware of the interior, and they're like cosmic tourists. They're going, bring it on. This is amazing. Whereas those of us that are coming out of green level, relational love and trying to get the first love, we need these practices. We're just starting to forge into this type of territory. And that stage is earned. But even you and Mark were way ahead of the average couple, because the average couple are going to turn that into a meltdown, or they're going to avoid the moment. They're going to withdraw from the moment.
No, we definitely didn't do that.
Right. Whereas most
Tom,
people,
we're kind of running out of time, and I'm really curious a little bit about the processes, how you work with these couples. You briefly mentioned that you do some eye gazing exercises with them and also breathing exercises. What are the exercises? Can you let us in a little bit on your secrets?
I sure can. So on the, remember, you can see more. I'll describe the eye gazing real quick, but then I want to describe the latest one since you asked.
Yeah, describe the latest one, because the eye gazing we have already described in the other 4 videos you were talking at the beginning, and which can be found on your website, drtomhabib.com, and also in the Wisdom Factory.
Yep. Okay, so in the eye gazing exercise, what we're agreeing ahead of time is to find an external poignant moment and to look at each other. You can't smile, you can't look away, you're calming down the physiology, and you're holding that sacred space, and we're realizing it develops a pathway between people so that they can handle that level of intensity. And we practice that a little bit. But here's the latest one I gave to a number of couples during the holidays. So what they would do during the holidays is they would find a moment, say if they had a family. Like for Christine and I, it was the girls were back from college on the holidays. We were sitting down for a meal together. And Christine created this moment of family time. And this could happen during a family movie. I can feel the girls going back into time when we'd get together. And we just felt that we space together. And then Christine and I would look at each other, and I would slightly nod my head, acknowledging the moment that we'd created, not letting it pass just as a moment. That acknowledgement seems to develop that intimacy of first love, and it becomes easier to get back there. So there's so many of those moments that pass without recognition for a couple.
Mm.
Can you feel that with me? And it's an agreement. I'm not going to let that pass. That if Christine does something really well, I'm going to go, Christine. And we already have that eye gaze technique down. And it's a very deep level of resonance that we're sharing that lays that pathway that makes it easier to go back there.
Mm.
So that's kind of the latest is I have couples out there finding those moments, again, they're externally derived because a child did something well. It was a moment of family participation. It was something. But the couple, again, is using that in order to create that we space between them.
Mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Very beautiful. And we can invite people to try that. And not believe that love falls from the sky, as we say, but the first, maybe yes, at the first moment, the falling in love with someone good for you. That was a show we did with Martin about 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes.
And that maybe falls from the sky, but the rest doesn't. And that's normally where all the films end, no? And the work comes later.
Yeah.
It seems to be much less a topic for films. But
right.
Yeah. So at that point, thank you, Tom, to have given a new explanation of your work. And it's going always more ahead and ahead. And thank you. And if you want to give me the charts, I can put them in and people see that. Yeah, unfortunately, we had this moment that we had to change the Hangouts, and I think we lost viewers, unfortunately, by doing that. Hopefully, we will publicize the video and let people have that then later. Technology is, sometimes not as it should be, but
it's still amazing that we can
do that. That you are sitting in Turkey, I'm sitting in Italy, Tom sits in California, and we can talk together about these topics. This is, okay. Sometimes technology is doing what it does, but
that moment too, that's possible, and maybe in Australia or whatnot. It's just like fantastic.
Yeah, it is really great. So,
and I wanted to compliment you, Tom, on people sometimes they often expect that as we get more complex, things should get more simple around it, and in some way they do, but also the way we relate with each other increases in complexity, and to what you're charting out as far as mapping that, so that at least one partner has the map to navigate the complexity and relationships on that level it's really a great contribution, and gives me hope, for more couples moving in that direction.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah, thank you.
To end the war between the people who are living together, and to open up the heaven, which is possible.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that new wars, if we want to use that negative word, new challenges emerge with every level. So we can be quite peaceful on one level and have everything figured out. And then we grow into the next level, and new challenges and new desires and new needs and complexities emerge. And so we need trailblazers and map makers like Tom, who mapped it out, because you're unlike me, who's more a theorist. Now in Turkey, I enjoy having groups every week, right? And really immersing myself a little bit more. But people here are pretty much mythic and orange, which is also interesting. Anyway, saying that you move ahead and have the practices that's really fantastic from your own experience with your wife and also with your clients. So, bravo. Thank you.
Yeah, and it makes hope that there is again a benefit from all this work we do, and it gets better and better if we are committed to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Heidi and Martin.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Hopefully we do this again sometime.
Yes. Okay. So, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.